Awesome. Hello, everyone. I think you should be trickling in from our waiting room. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will have a kind of casual fireside chat today. We're really lucky to welcome a lot of our course creators, our course leadership, and some of our founders today. So excited to start the discussion with all of you. We are using Zoom webinar, as you can see. We'll be using the Q&A function of Zoom webinar. So you should be able to find that Q&A button on your screen for Zoom. And then you're able to type your question. This is very participant driven, so we really encourage you all to ask your questions. They can really be of any nature around the course content, around kind of advice from the awesome folks we have today. So really anything. And then you can use this thumbs up button to kind of vote on questions you really want to make sure that we get to today. We will be recording this event, so we'll provide the link afterwards. I'll post them in Discord. But yeah, excited to kind of start the conversation. And that's all I think from me, but I'll hand it over. We can kind of hear introductions from our awesome panelists.
Wonderful. And I'll be emceeing our meeting today. Before we get started, I want you to know the kind of questions you can ask, and we want you to ask it right now, because last time we spent lots of time on introductions, and then at the end we were big time out of time to answer all the questions. So what questions can you answer? You can answer any question that matters for you in the context of NeuroMatch and the three course and the Comp Neuro course and the deep learning course and the NeuroAI course. What can you ask? You can ask career-related question. How do I get an internship? Or how do I get into a lab? Or how do I apply? You can ask questions relating to the future of the field. Where's the field going? What about this? What about this? You can ask questions about the cars. Xaq, how did you pull off a new cars without a pandemic happening? You can ask kind of all the different questions. And the key is that if you at all have a question, you ask it now. There are no embarrassing questions. Now, after saying that, it's time for some introductions. My name is Konrad Kording, and I'm joined here by a bunch of wonderful panelists. Why don't we do a round there? Xaq, who are you?
I'm Xaq. I'm living in Pittsburgh right now. I'm a faculty member at Carnegie Mellon University, and I study principles of intelligence in brains and machines.
Wonderful. Kate.
Hi, folks. My name is Kate. I am currently living in Bloomington, Indiana, in the US, and I am a faculty member, and I use data to study brains and how people move through the world.
And what about Brad?
Hello, everyone. I live about halfway between Konrad and Xaq in State College, and I work in a psychology department, and my primary job is to use behavioral neuromodeling to study how memories are created.
Awesome. And last but not least, Byron.
I am rounding out our Pittsburgh or our Pennsylvania contingent. We're heavily overrepresented here. I'm also in the Pittsburgh area. I actually worked in brain-machine interface and neuromorphic robotic control back in my academic career, but I moved into industry and have been doing startups around artificial intelligence for the last decade, both before large language models and after. So happy to be here.
And I think what you just saw is also one of the key things that made NeuroMatch so awesome is that people came together and come together from all directions. We have industry folks, we have academic folks, we have folks that are more on the bio side, people that are more on the AI side. We have people with different attitudes, different backgrounds, different countries, all that. But today we are the Pennsylvania party. Why don't we jump right in? So Sarah asked a first question, and I will distribute the questions a little bit. And it goes to Xaq. Is the bitter lesson not going against what NeuroAI is trying to achieve, i.e. learning in artificial networks needs a different approach from learning in biological networks?
Sarat, this is a wonderful question, and it's a really deep one. And I don't actually think we know the answer to it yet. So I think that this is a very hot, engaging field. As you observe, the bitter lesson means that like all of the efforts that we try to do, that we put in smarts, are paling in comparison to just bigger data and bigger compute. And that's why we're seeing all the massive successes of the day. Um, I think that there's some that's going to work for a while, but we're going to run into some limitations at some point, and then we need better smarts. So, for example, we've already trained on all language data that exists basically for large language models. There isn't more data to get, so the scaling ends. Uh, we can add more compute, and people are adding more compute and training on the same data for longer, which I think is, that can get us somewhere using the data that we have more efficiently, but ultimately we can't scale better. There are some other things that make it hard to scale. But if you look at the history of our brains or animal brains, it's not just the training is very different because we don't do gradient descent over evolution. When we are born, we start with uh, a an inductive bias, a whole set of inherited attributes, which are things that are have evolved over eons to get us where we are, whereas artificial agents have to start from scratch every time that they're trained. Uh, and so we don't know what a good description of our history is and something that would substitute instead of having to train from scratch to get us to the point where we're starting from like what a baby starts with. And I feel like knowing that about animal brains, what the modular structure is, what the kind of innate biases are, that's the kind of thing that will help improve artificial agents because we don't have to recapitulate evolution every time.
I was just going to briefly add, because we have all three communities here. The bitter lesson is just the observation that long term, basically relatively dumb big data, domain general learning seems to win against all other things. Kate.
Oh, I was just going to add to what Zach said. So, I collaborate with a number of developmental researchers who are collaborating in the artificial intelligence space right now because, in addition to needing to know, like, what's the structure and function of the brain that baby animals start with? What is the curriculum of their visual cognitive, like the experiences they have over those first handful of years of life. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that like even something as simple as like the content in their visual experience is changing rapidly as they are developing visual and motor skills. And that there's something to getting that input at the right time as well. So I think there's a lot we still don't know about human brains, and there's a lot that these two fields still have to teach each other, particularly
Hmm.
when we run out of that upper bound of compute space and need to figure out smarter ways to make gains.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think, and this also ties into the third part of your question about what are the main challenges. I think one of them is that one of the chief ways that humans learn is by actively interacting with the world, right? So our brains are constantly running experiments on the world every moment of the day. Like we just reach out and grab something, and our visual system is figuring out where our hand is and how that connects to or is affected by the pattern of muscle commands that are sent. And so we're constantly running experiments on the world around us and also our own nervous system, right? And deep learning models and other current AI approaches are not really able to run those interactive experiments. They just have this huge list of data that they're trained on, but they don't get to sort of play with the data in the way that humans do. And that is a huge, so one of the challenges there is that you cannot sort of rapidly accelerate that physical interaction with the world the way that we can training, right? Like you can't just have this tower of robots running these simulations at like 1,000 times of reality because the physics is what it is, right? You can't move the parts of the robots faster than they can actually move. And so that's going to put a huge limitation on the rate at which we can use those kinds of interactive experiments to train things.
Great. So the next question, let me take Didi's question, who asked, what was the inspiration for coming up with the NeuroAI course? What are your thoughts on the current version, structure, and impact so far? What do you think the course should look for content-wise in the near future? Let's say 2 to 3 years from now.
I guess this is directed at me as well. So the original inspiration is that a bunch of us have been working at the interface between neuro and AI, and that's been really fruitful. And we, in fact, started an institute, an NSF-funded AI institute, which is dedicated to artificial and natural intelligence. ARNI, is what we call it. It's based at Columbia, but it has people in other places as well. And as part of that proposal, we suggested making a new course that would start to address some of these different issues. And it was interesting putting it together because there are different threads in neuro AI, and the two major ones are one going from AI to neuro, which is using artificial intelligence to try to understand brains, and the other is trying to go from brains to AI, trying to get ideas from brains that could make better AI. And so emphasizing the different principles that are kind of shared between those threads is something that we felt was going to be a good common structure. And then the key theme, as you're seeing, is generalization, because that's the thing that's going to evaluate whether we're succeeding, right? You can train and then test on the same data set out of sample, but you don't know if you've really captured the structures that we think are important. And so generalization is key. That was the inspiration for figuring out what is it that leads to better generalization. And then from there, we tried to find different pieces and components that would generalize, generalize how it generalizes. Then in the future, I think that this is going to have to be dynamic content because it is such a new field. Um, and we will need to see what new principles emerge. But that said, the structure is such that I think that those core concepts of big things and small things are going to remain important, and learning and circuitry are going to remain important. And so maybe the balance of exactly what things go into those categories and how they interact will change. But I think the overall structure is maybe there's another key component, but I feel like those are the biggies.
But I think there's a general trend, not like with AI coming, that we will need to build more AI into it. Maybe Byron, you have some views about it. Not like how should the future look like for this kind of teaching?
It's a great question because we're the field is evolving so rapidly, right? Things are changing, especially on the technology side, that people are pushing forward at a tremendous rate. And I see there's a question further down that I think we can get to later around the course content, specifically at NeuroMatch and the deep learning side. But I think it's difficult because some of the foundational stuff is the same, but the techniques and the things that are specific are evolving quickly. I think one thing we see, this was kind of also going toward the previous question and discussion, but I think an area that would be really fascinating that we need to invest more time in is around the continual learning space, right? We are very much in this in the pure AI realm. It's a lot of train a model, freeze it, use it for some engineering or some business purpose, and then make claims about consciousness or cognition around it. And I think that's a problem. The continual learning thing, especially, is really important. The whole, you know, um, stability plasticity dilemma that we have, where these models really can't solve that because we don't want them to adapt, because we don't want them to go down and get worse. So yeah, I think it's important, but I also think it is a big challenge. How do you keep these things fresh? And I don't know if maybe I'll use this as an excuse to roll into this question from Misaj, about the DL course specifically and the content. So you raise a good point, which is that content was created back in the pandemic. It was created in 2021, pre the Chat GPT sort of moment. And
Byron was part of it, I think.
yeah, no, I mean, I was the CTO of NeuroMatch at the time. I was helping to kind of organize and get a lot of that off the ground. And one of the things that, we were looking at the time was, okay, let's build up the foundations. Let's introduce you to sort of core concepts of machine learning, of deep learning, and then be like, there's a lot of different fields. Computer vision was very exciting at the time. It's a little less so now, but still very important. Reinforcement learning was very exciting at the time, but it's gone in sort of directions. It's kind of been very fad driven in this space. NLP was a little less interesting, and now it's very, very much a front and center. And the reality is that trying to adapt that content, like it takes quite a long time to produce those materials. And the field, as I said, has been changing very quickly. And so trying to keep that stuff fresh and up to date has been a challenge. In fact, a big focus of this year was just realizing that a lot of the tooling that we had relied upon that was used 3 years ago, 4 years ago, is broken. It doesn't work anymore. The techniques have changed, the libraries have changed, the ideas have moved on. And so now going deep into one topic area feels like that's not getting you up to speed with what's happening. And so it becomes challenging of how do we think about how to focus that course in a way that there's just, I mean, you highlight so many different topics here. The operational side of ML, the idea of RAG. How do I use external sources to influence the outputs of these systems? There is tremendous information, and we can't fit all of it into 3 weeks. It's just not possible. And so I think there's either a call for more courses that are more specific. I would also say that there are lots and lots of resources out there. And so maybe it's not the job of NeuroMatch to try to do everything, but to really still focus on the mission of kind of getting the core ideas out there, giving you a bit of a fire hose, and then having you kind of go off and there. But I'm curious what other people think on the panel about that topic in particular, where things keep changing. How do we think about a course that is, having to keep up with something that is moving way faster than maybe we can keep a hand on it?
So I've been involved in the Comp Neuro course, which I know we're here to talk a little bit about DL and AI, and I was the executive director when we launched DL, and that was super fun, and I think it's a great course. I think it's a little bit less challenging on the Comp Neuro side, but at the same time, there is a lot of change happening in computational neuroscience. And one of the conversations we've been having this year in the Comp Neuro course is how to potentially use our projects and our content connection to the projects that students do in order to push that forward. I think it's a little bit easier to open new project questions and like potentially curate a data set and use that as a launching pad to allow students to explore more complex concepts and keep up to date with like what's changing. And so we've been exploring that as an opportunity in Comp Neuro, and we've opened a couple of new project data sets this year in order to do that. I think and I should say it's still Marius would be I think it would be remiss to not say that it takes a lot of effort to curate a project data set. But I think one of the advantages of that is it potentially opens up a lot of different directions for students to take, whereas a module is fairly self-contained, like a module of content is fairly self-contained. And so it is, I think, across all of the courses, this question of like, what role does the content play? How do we update it, given the effort that's required to do so? Is an active conversation for all of us.
Cool, but like maybe to clarify the call to the community,
Yeah.
these changes happen because people tell themselves that they want them to happen. And I think everyone who is involved with NeuroMatch wants these changes and updates to happen, but it kind of requires bottom-up community input for things
Yeah,
to
so
happen.
if you want to see these changes, what Konrad is saying is if you want to see these changes, you should reach out to Courtney because we'd love to have you join as a volunteer and come help us make that happen. We need the energy of new volunteers. We'd love to make new things, make the old things better.
Cool. So I want to get to the highest rated next comment now, which is by Zayu, who asks, as non-computer science major students, such as those majoring in psychology, is it sufficient for us to just apply others' algorithms or copy some code and piece together some models? To which extent do we need to go? And I presume it means like into a more computational direction. That's something that I imagine a few of our panelists have strong opinions about. Who wants to go ahead? Kate.
I can go. I think another neuromatcher said this a way that I really like. You really need to know what the buttons you push actually do. Um, and so to the extent that you're using, like, it's absolutely okay to take advantage of algorithms that others are developing and apply them. Um, uh, and I think that that's a really good space to be in. But you need to understand enough about them to know what the trade-offs are, to know if someone has set up some nice code for you to use to apply their analysis, you still sort of are, I think, obligated to understand what that analysis is doing and what its limitations are.
And I mean, it might also relate to the course about the questions about updating course content. So the deep learning course doesn't necessarily teach you like the newest tools. It's not going to teach you LangChain or something. But LangChain is built on the things that are in the deep learning course. So at some level, in our core courses, Comp Neuro and deep learning, I think there's a strong focus on the skills and ideas that we feel are long-term enduring. But we should be, in my view, build courses on top of it that are then like, okay, if you know what a neural network does, here's how you can like really use that to build things. Great.
Yeah, I was going to jump in on that, just like as a kind of example from deep learning is like you absolutely do not need to be able to implement a large language model from scratch to be able to use one. But you really should understand what, in principle, they are. Because I think, especially right now, there's a lot of people who think they're magic, do everything black boxes, and they absolutely aren't. They are next token predictors. They look at a
Yeah.
statistical distribution of tokens, and then they produce another token based off of what they think is the best through some process. And it turns out you can do really amazing things with that at a scale and what we've seen. But that's what they are, right? And that's why people have called them stochastic parrots and other things like it. And I think it's important, again, like what Kate said, understanding the tools. You don't have to know them to the deep core. You don't have to be able to reconstruct them from scratch and have that deep intuition, but you do need to know what the tools are that you're using at a high level so that you know how to apply them best. And you don't spend a lot of time going down avenues that go nowhere because you actually are using the wrong tool for the job.
I
Uh,
also think, well, just one more quick thing on this one. Um, it can be very helpful to at least one or two times to build something from absolute scratch so that you have an understanding of what it feels like to know something down to its very ground. And you don't need to do everything from scratch, obviously, as Byron was just saying, but at least knowing what that's like and knowing what that understanding feels like will help develop your intuitions for when you're using some of these tools. If maybe they're operating in a suspicious way, it can help you sort of like understand maybe when they're not doing what you think that they're doing.
That happens way too often.
Yeah.
I want to also mention that one of the things that we're talking about for next round is at some point in the near future, is smaller modules that you could potentially mix and match and might be easier to update than an entire course. So we might have a vision module in the future. We might have a language module in the future. There's different ways that we can do it. Um, and if you have the foundations that are shared and probably will remain shared, then you can customize what your course is. So we would love to hear from you what demand there is for different kinds of modules like this.
I want to go to Nikolai Safonov's question there, where Nikolai asked for more courses. When is there going to be a NeuroComp Part 2 in NMA, like a course for students that have taken Comp Neuro NMA, and more materials that did not fit Comp Neuro NMA? Or are NeuroAI and deep learning the courses in some regard? Like, yes, like NeuroAI. So look, like our design criterion for the Comp Neuro course is only things should be in it that are relevant for the vast majority of students. So most more advanced things are relevant only for a subset. Not like you can say, if you're an experimentalist working on ion channels, like, with all due respect to the wonderful NeuroAI course, maybe NeuroAI course isn't what you really need there. If you do wetware, you don't need to be able to build neural networks yourself. So the deep learning course isn't going to be all that useful. So I think it's at least my thinking, and I'd love to hear your feedback, Nikolai, there, is that instead of like setting up a CompNeuro 2 course, it's more like after the basic courses, and they certainly contain CompNeuro and maybe CompNeuro and deep learning. There should rather be like a set of like slightly more specialized courses. But this is something that maybe the other panelists can chime in. How do you think if we had a bigger ecosystem of courses, how should it look and feel like?
I mean, I think I liked what Xaq said before in the last question, is that it would be smaller, more focused modules. I think that, having because again, it's a big volunteer organization. It's great that we have all these wonderful people who come together to put this together, but it is time, it is effort, and there's a maintenance cost, as we talked about as well, to keep these things relevant. And so having maybe one core course for these sort of pillar topics is a good way to go. And then as we think about more advanced topics or follow on because you really enjoyed Comp Neuro and you want to go deeper, maybe it is having smaller, more focused modules that you can take on.
Zach.
Another thing that we've been talking about and maybe in the pipeline is broadening the audience, like going for younger kids as well. So we might make something like a NeuroMatch Kids. I know that some people in NeuroMatch have already done some things with like escape rooms that are thematic, which I think is really fun. So, we may work on that with different collaborators as well.
Another direction that is relevant to this that I think could potentially fit well with the development of smaller, more advanced knowledge modules is the Impact Scholars program that Courtney and Viviana have been working on for the last couple of years. And this gives students and TAs who have completed the course an opportunity to work in a small group with a mentor over the course of 6 months to develop a project. I think once you have a core set of skills, this sort of more advanced knowledge comes from a kind of longer term engagement with a set of ideas and building of something that is yours alone, right? And so one of the ways in which we are exploring where do students go next after they complete one of these courses is through the Impact Scholars program, which if you're in the course this year, I encourage you to take a look at. I think it's on one of the Discord channels, and Courtney can probably drop a link for us into the chat. But yeah, I agree, and it's a topic of conversation is what are the next steps for students that have completed courses. Another thing I'll say that has been a consistent theme as I have talked, so my first year I was the chair of instruction, and I organized and led our TAs along with Carson Stringer. And one of the consistent themes since that first year is that people are surprised at how much more they learn from the materials when they transition from being a student to being a TA. All of a sudden you have to explain in great detail and answer questions that are kind of maybe coming at the material from a different direction than you were thinking about it, and then you leave this course with a much stronger grasp of the material. So that's another direction that I encourage people to think about, is applying to be a TA, because I think even if you think like, oh, I just went through this material, I get it. There's a lot there, and there's a lot more to be understood when you can explain it to other people.
The education literature is very clean on that.
Yes, it is.
Something dramatically improves understanding of material. So if you teach something, you will be great at it. If you just learn about it, you will mostly forget about it, with all due respect. Great. So why don't we take Baptiste has a question that is like super highly rated. AI research is very fast-paced with the push to publish regularly at conferences. And indeed, for people in the community here who might not know this, if you're a PhD student in computer science, you're expected to basically every 6 months publish something at a computer science conference. If, on the other hand, you're more like in bio, it's totally fine if you just write like a much bigger paper every year or two. So the expectations are very, very different. And then Baptiste asks, while neuroscience research is inherently slow to how hard experiments are, risky ideas can also become a lot more expensive than in AI. Although like AI, like for people who like aren't used to like the modern AI world, lots of AI people in the AI field, certainly those working in industry, they burn through somewhere between $10,000 and $1 million a year in just like pure compute costs. So in any case, the question is, how do you deal with the strong difference in how we approach projects in those two fields?
I would start by saying that academic disciplines are different inherently. And so if you are focused on the idea of doing scientific scholarship in a field, you kind of work within the way that field works. As Conrad said, computer science has a very different model. So like, again, I came through computational neuroscience. It was much more of the you spend a long time really doing something deeply, you write a long paper, it gets published, it can take years for that work to appear. Whereas, and into some cases, the field was okay with that, right? Because that's just how the field worked. In computer science, because especially in the field of AI, because of we could say these strong commercial and economic incentives to get things out and to do flag planting and to say that you've got the highest score on the leaderboard. Like there's just different dynamics at play there, and so there's actually a lot of also, as Conrad mentioned, there's a lot of lamenting in that field of like the pace is brutal. You've got to get something out, and there's so many people in academia who just complain about like, I don't have compute budget. I can't get the GPUs. I can't get the budget to run experiments. How can I compete with industry labs? How can I do this? So you have to kind of look at different areas, and the common refrain there is go look at other things. You don't have to train large language models. Like there's tremendous amount of stuff happening at these fields, even in machine learning and AI, that aren't just look at my latest language model experiment. That's just sort of the fad of the moment. Um, and so it's just, again, I'd say the difference is the fields are different. And if you're just focused on, again, I'll repeat, doing good scholarship, you work at the pace that's appropriate, and you work on your research question. Yeah. Zach.
I agree with what you're saying, Byron. There's also and there's I think a lot of hand-wringing about how much people have to publish. Even it's worth publishing even little incremental things just to get your name on a paper with this kind of pace. And I feel like there's some pushback against that, but there's also a massive tide of people who are carrying along that field. So like how do we resist that impulse? I don't know that it's like certainly that's something that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to just say, oh, well, I'm going to go against the flow there and I'm going to think deeper and have fewer but more impactful publications. It's a risky approach. And it's one that can succeed, but again, it has the risk. So I'm curious what other people feel about how to handle that torrent and whether like you should just go with the flow because that's easy and practical, or if there's something that we can do about it.
So I think there are ways of pushing back. So by default, a lot of people in computer science are like, okay, let's build. But if you look at papers, it's often unclear what the questions are that they ask. And I think a lot of like at least the original motivation of what we wanted to do at NeuroMatch is help people ask good questions. And I think if you ask a great question, you can usually answer it just as well with like a thousandth of the compute that someone else has. It's just that if you're in areas where there's no questions, I'm like, what's the question of like making like some language tasks like a little bit better? Like, sure, you get state of the art and you get a certain amount of street cred for like having SOTA and like anything. Like, no, like it like totally helps your career if you're like, yeah, and there's this big data set that everyone does stuff on, and I'm on the leaderboard, or like I'm on top of the leaderboard. Like, sure, that like totally counts and people care about that, but many times the way to like just push it is like, okay, I get this thing and I combine it with this thing and it's like 2% better or something. It's kind of like there's so many unbelievably boring papers that I think if you write papers that have real questions, you can survive often just fine with much lower compute than some others. That being said, is having a graphic card an enabler? Like, yes, having your own dedicated good graphics card is going to be much nicer than Google Colab. Is having like a little, like having 4 graphics cards better than one? Sure. Having 1,000 better, is that good for your career? Sure. But like being compute limited in a way forces you to be in a space of like deeper questions. So I wouldn't despair about this situation, Xaq.
I agree with that, but I think that it's also, I want to just re-emphasize the risk that people have. If they have a question that's a good question but hard to answer with good compute or not, there's still this trend to publish incremental things as you're grappling with the deeper, harder, more important questions. And so how do you work with a community that is expecting that level of productivity, like quote productivity, right? It's not necessarily real productivity, but it looks on paper like productivity. And this is especially true when people are evaluating CVs, where they're kind of counting publications instead of evaluating publications. And the problem is systematic because how are evaluation committees that are judging people in industry or um, in academia by their CVs, how can they engage with the number of people that are in this community and evaluate what they're actually doing in a way that's fair and can scale?
Absolutely. I want to take the highest rated question next. This is a question by Sofia Sparanska, who asked, what factors make up a strong high-impact Neuro project paper? To draw a parallel with experimental work, in order to publish in CNS, one needs to have numerous experiments using complementary approaches that pinpoint at the same principle you're describing in your paper. One is expected to show lots of controls, use cutting edge techniques like cell type and so forth in the field, and no one has really addressed it before. How does this look like in Neuro? What are the main criteria that you want to be fulfilled by a potential project so that you decide to pursue it? So before going to that, let me briefly emphasize what's behind it. Sophia, you're exactly onto something here, which is a lot of today's high impact CNS papers are not answering any questions. They just do lots of really expensive things that are usually not asking any good questions and that are just tacked together and like, look, this costs $3 million to do, so you should publish this in Nature. And I'm not going to name anything, but like that happens a ton more than it should. It's an absolute disaster, and the field is basically conceptually dying under this weight. You have like the most famous people, and then they kind of pretend that there's a question that they don't even answer. It's really, really, really problematic. But I think I can give you my answer, and I want to hear the other people on the panel hear about it. My answer is, if you actually ask a clean question, and I have a number of like highly visible papers. If you actually ask a clean question, if you make like an important point, there's still a very good chance that you'll get published very well. But yes, there is a way of basically buying yourself high impact papers by making things expensive, and it's harming the field in a way that no one can quantify. What does everyone else feel about it?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that we're sort of emphasizing neuro or sort of high-end neuro methods a little bit too much at the expense of the questions, as you were saying, Conrad. Um, and my personal preference is to have more of an emphasis on complex behavior as part of that, which, although, has limitations in how you can apply it to animal models, as well. But it's certainly a lot cheaper to do that kind of work as well. So that's my sort of preferred approach, is to sort of emphasize cheap behavioral projects that can really highlight interesting questions. And then once you have those nailed down, then to approach the neuro side.
And anyone else? I'm sure everyone on the panel has an opinion there. Xaq.
I think that communication is really key. I think that it's part, like Conrad, you're absolutely right that the question is the foundation. And I feel like that question is really part of the communication. Like I'm understanding what is missing. And I'm able to articulate what is missing and why what this thing that I'm talking about and presenting here is actually helping resolve what is missing. So, but you need to be able to say really clearly what that gap is. And you have to have a good gap, which is the good question. So I think that the ability to communicate what the essence is something that is not emphasized enough. It's like, oh, let's just write something and then we'll hope that it's good impact. You really need to know what your audience needs to know.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to follow up, and because I think like um,
Hmm.
I agree. Sorry, I agree with Conrad and Xaq. It comes back to this question. I think the reason why it feels maybe less clear for a comp neuro paper how to do this is because the question asking is actually quite difficult, and because in experimental papers you can take all of these different approaches and do very sort of fancy techniques. It can be easier to sort of hide if you don't have a great question. I think there are papers out there that are asking really good questions and using fancy techniques, and there are also papers where you get to the end and you're like, oh, well, they did all these things, but what did I actually learn, right? There's both kinds of these things in experimental neuroscience. And in comp neuro, I think you're a little bit more exposed because you basically have your question and then you have your model or your computational approach to answering that question. And it's maybe a little bit harder to cobble together together potential distractions. I mean, it's very interesting because I think I felt for a while somewhat self-conscious that one of my earliest contributions to the comp neuro field was actually just adding a line of trig to a very, very old tuning curve model. And I think that I felt for a little while that that meant that like I wasn't really doing computational neuroscience. But I think that that's not true because we were answering an important question about how the brain combined information in order to understand the 3D world. And it just turned out that to answer at least a chunk of the question, we didn't need anything complicated. Um, and so that work ended up getting published and in a fairly high impact place. And I think it speaks to this idea that Xaq and Conrad have been discussing about that the question is important and communicating the question is important. And it takes a while to develop the question. I mean, I think that's part of what I'm a junior faculty member, and I feel like in this first handful of years of my faculty position, one of the really big things I've been learning is how to think deeply about the questions that I'm asking and develop good ones that my students can work on and that I can work on. And that's been a big part of the growth process.
I have a very practical way of judging whether something is a good question as well that we use in our lab sometimes. If you can get people in your lab to bet different ways about its outcome. Like if people are disagreeing, oh, I think that it's gonna, if everybody agrees, then it's not such a good question. Like everyone expects it. Of course, you could be wrong. Everybody could be surprised. But if there's a real dispute over this, then it tends to be a good question. And we use that as like a good metric.
I tried to write about it. I've been working on an app. This is I'll be sharing like the slightly older version of that, but like that has a long list of criteria of what makes questions good or bad, and it's still hard to cleanly say if a question is good or bad. It's just it's just incredibly complicated. There's going to be a new version of this app coming out that does a lot of cooler things. Good. Let's see which question we should take next. But like, yes, no, like we are touching on kind of like some of like the big meta questions. Now, like on the deep learning side, the role of compute, on the bio side, kind of the role of questions and money. It's a little sad. Maybe let's continue with a question by Sarath, who asks, given the huge amount of data available and ever-increasing compute resources, hooray Moore's law, do we expect artificial networks evolving faster to learn better ways at solving tasks than humans and possibly achieve AGI, or as everyone now says it, advanced, and I'm adding that to the original question, advanced super intelligence. What does everyone think here? And maybe we should kick it off with Byron.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll preface this by saying, and again, I maybe partially my personality, partially maybe my uh, experience doing human subjects experiments, which I recommend everyone get a chance to do if you can, because it really grounds you in the fact that things are not super easy. It's I'm skeptical. I'll say that. That's my default mode for a lot of this stuff. I it gets very narrow and specific. Like we've talked a lot about, we think about AI as being like, like it reaches a certain goal. We don't really, I at least think, and I think this is a big debate, like what is intelligence? What is AGI? What is the definition of that? How do we know we've hit it? Every time we pick some sort of proxy for that, we just drive super hard at that. We solve it, and then we say, okay, but did we learn anything? Are we now at AGI? And then often we say no, because it turns out it's just a weak proxy. So I feel like while large language models, in particular these large scale ones, have exhibited a lot of capabilities that we didn't expect, I would say, and are very surprised in some sense by, and now have normalized. They definitely are still very shallow in many regards, and so I think, like we alluded to earlier in the discussion, these models are not really adaptive yet. They kind of pick up a thing, they do exactly what you tell them to do, or they try to imitate something that you kind of like because we've tweaked some of them to sort of mimic our own preferences or some subset of humans' preferences. Um, and it looks good and it's a nice shallow trick, and some of it's useful, right? But when we talk about intelligence, and are we approaching something that's like human level intelligence and cognitive capability? I mean, I think we're still quite a far ways away from that. But I do think that we are going to incrementally solve specific tasks. Like we have calculators that can do math way better than we can, certain kinds of math, arithmetic. We have tools that can do things way better than we can do in various ways. And so I think we're going to see continuing drive toward that. But I think that it's just still a very difficult question to pose in terms of what do we mean by how do we judge performance in this space? How do we know when we've achieved certain things? I can ramble about this for a long time. I'm going to stop. Any other thoughts there?
Yeah. What does everyone else feel about AGI versus ASI?
I personally don't feel like humans are as smart as we like to think we are. So I think that it won't be that hard to exceed us in some ways. But it's really interesting to me how strong of a dichotomy there is in the community. it's really polarized. Some people think it's preposterous to think so. Some people think it's inevitable. And so I don't know, maybe this is one of those good questions, right? Because we can get people gambling on it, betting on either side.
So I lead CIFA LMB, which is one of the leading deep learning groups in the world. And I think among those people that are at least pretty close, arguably, to what's happening, I think the vast majority believes not only that it's inevitable that they get better than humans, but I think almost everyone in that group believes it's going to happen in the next 5 to 15 years or so, maybe earlier. So I'm personally, I believe in that complementarities will exist for a long time, which is that a human with an AI system is still going to be better than an AI system for a long period of time. I mean, maybe not everyone knows it here, like chess playing for a very, very long time. A human who chooses between the AI's favorite moves often work better there for a long time, work better than just the AI. So I do believe that there's going to be quite a while where kind of you plus an AI is better than just AI. But that means that I personally believe anyone who doesn't learn how to work well with AIs is completely icing themselves out of any intelligent jobs in the very near future. Like already today, like if you don't know how to use AIs, you're at a significant disadvantage and it's only going to get worse. And I think like everyone here needs to get good at working with AI. Like absolutely everyone. In fact, like during NeuroMatch, like you don't understand something, sure, ask your TA. But like if you just need like some information, like a lot of like, no, what's the syntax of that? Or like define this term in neuroscience. It's like kind of my life has a parallel chain where I ask OpenAI stuff that I don't understand. And there's a shocking amount of stuff that I don't understand in my life. And and I think like even if it doesn't like eclipses us, we need to like all prepare for the coming transition. Again, like that probably in Xaq's take is just like I'm on the brainwashed on the one side of the dichotomy. But I think already now it's clear that that AI makes us more efficient at a lot of things.
I will add, though, that there is a long track record of people predicting that AI is on the horizon and failing for many decades. This has been true. And so it's always a question of what makes it different this time, right, compared to all the previous times. And maybe they're right this time.
There's old lore, right? That all of computer vision was going to be someone's summer project.
Yeah, and indeed, like when they came up with the perceptron like 70 years ago, they were expecting that it very quickly would replace humans. But right now, there are already tasks that we consider very complicated, like software engineering, that AI is doing a lot more efficiently than a lot of humans. I mean, like if you use tools like Claude Code, it is truly eye-opening. But anyone else want to add something? Otherwise, we have 5 minutes and we have one question per minute for the remainder. Actually, like no, let's go quickly through the questions. Pawan is basically asking if companies use AI filters to select resumes, how can we use AI to make it into the interview?
This is a losing battle. There is no answer to this. This is like ads, ad blocking versus ad serving. It is a constant battle, and it is going to continue to the bottom.
I've heard that some people have done prompt injection in their CVs by just adding in some text, instruct the AI to rate them highly.
And they do it with papers too. I'm not sure how successful it is.
Yeah, right.
in the end, making sure that AIs don't fall for stuff in the user prompt is not rocket science, and like this will all be solved, unfortunately, if that's the way to go. Subhrojit asks, hello creators. Can there be a beginner and an advanced course for comp neuro and deep learning? Maybe this is almost a question to Courtney here. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say some of the stuff that folks have shared before, it is a lot of work for us to create new courses. And I do think some of the stuff around like we're trying to build foundational knowledge, but I do like the idea of doing some more kind of workshop stuff for more advanced focus things. So we are also always interested in feedback around like what we do next. So I think that's, yeah, I like the idea, and we should hear more from what other folks are interested in and what types of courses people want to take.
So Diddy asked a question that I think a lot of people have on their mind, which is if you come from a less computational field, how can you like make it into like comp neuro, like NeuroMatch land if you want?
Linear algebra.
I agree. But are we blinded by the type of work that we do? I don't know.
I mean, this is adding and subtracting and multiplying and dividing when you have more than one number at a time. I think it's so
That seems useful.
fundamental. I think everybody needs to know linear algebra.
Yes. And then looking for opportunities to either collaborate or incorporate some of these ideas into the work that you're doing so that you start to get practical experience doing them, I think is important.
Cool. Anonymous attendee asks, which countries pay for neuroscience? I mean, look, like I gotta answer this because it's so obvious. Like basically, the countries that everyone knows pay for neuroscience. So like America pays lots for it, Europe pays lots for it, probably roughly on par. The rest of the world has much less resources, and there's kind of like not like there's some amount in Australia, but like it's basically like rich Western countries that have
I
that.
think there are also some leaders. There's some leaders in the East too, in Japan and Korea
Yeah.
and China.
Well, in China, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, part of our mission here is to engage in the global community and make neuroscience and computational sciences more of a global conversation. But for totally practical reasons, a lot of what Konrad is saying is absolutely true.
Anonymous attendee asks, what are misconceptions? What are things people believe about neuroscience that are not true? That sounds like a fun one.
Oh God, there's so many of them. Oh, you only use 10% of your brain.
Left brain, right brain.
Left brain, right brain.
Yeah, there you go. We don't understand how the brain works. Like we actually know a fair amount about how the brain works now. Not everything.
No, hold on. Like that's I'm gonna push back on. Like
I was gonna say, I think you found a good question.
How the brain works.
I think, it depends on about what. There's not a single answer.
How do you recognize a hand?
We don't know that.
That's what I mean.
Right? But we know a lot of other things.
Exactly.
We know
the question is, do we know things about brains? The answer is yes. For example, it's in our head. But if the question is, do we understand how it works? To me, that includes understand how we do the things that we do in our lives. And that's why I come out on the side we don't understand how brains work.
But I think, if you show a picture, then we know at a course level of detail that information propagates through these neurons, is represented by populations, gets nonlinearly transformed, and the details of how things are integrated over time and how they're weighted and what the nonlinear dynamics are, like we don't really understand that in detail. But we have a lot of core concepts that lead to something that we can say, yes, you can push left or right based on some basic classification.
But all the things that you listed are true for a vision transformer, and for that matter, like any other system that would do.
And that's part of my point, is that actually many of the things that we think are important here not the most sophisticated, like we have no idea how consciousness works. We have no idea even how some really core cognitive things work. But we actually have models that do many of the same things that brains do.
Cool. But what you all need to see is that there's still wonderful disagreement among people who are in the same field, have been friends for many years, and still disagree on things like, should we say that that we understand the brain? Let's take 3 more questions here. Sahil asked, as a research undergraduate having interest in NeuroAI, what's the first steps? That goes to Xaq.
Linear algebra.
Linear algebra. Okay, good. Another question by Sahil.
Same answer.
The same.
NeuroAI, linear algebra.
Do you think, last question here, anonymous attendee asked, do you think a master's degree is still needed to continue working in AI, or is it more accessible now?
I think that depends a lot on what it is you want to do, right? If you want to study AI, you can absolutely do it now. The resources are out there, the access to information, materials. The field is very, very, very big on publishing methods and materials. You can absolutely do your own research on without any sort of formal degree. But the questions you can answer are limited in some cases by how much funding and access to some of these resources you have. And so if you're saying like, do I need a master's degree to go work at Google to work on like training large language models? The answer is you probably need a PhD and several high impact publications at major conferences because that's how competitive that field is right now. But if you just want to answer questions about AI that you're excited about, and you can pose your questions, you do not need any sort of credential because this material is available to you.
But Byron, maybe to end on a hopeful note, like if we look at there is this list of like people that Meta offered like a crazy amount of money to. If I remember that list right, there are people who don't have a PhD. There's even, I believe, people who don't even have a master's. How does that work? Like there are a million different paths. You can, without a master's, kind of go join a startup, start building skills. Eventually, you're like great, and your credentialing becomes irrelevant. The vast majority of people, though, of course, make their way of like you get a degree from an elite place, make it in a good place and a good industry place, and so on and so forth. So basically, there's lots of places, and I think NeuroMatch is part of these organizations that make it actually easier to like make your path that is non-standard to the system.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about what do these credentials do, they're sort of a de-risking, they're a proxy for something or you've done something, right? If you have demonstrated research, if you have demonstrated work, you don't need those credentials if you have some public representation of your insight and the things that you have done. It's just that those help when you're evaluating, should I extend a ridiculous amount of money to you at an offer? I will comment on that is that partially also what Meta's trying to do is they want to see other ways of looking at things. Everyone has funneled down this, let's just turn AI into an engineering problem of how do we scale up computational training of transformer-based models. And there are some people who believe that that is going to asymptote and that we need new ideas. Maybe they're from computational neuroscience. I think so. So take the NeuroAI course, take the Comp Neuro course, take the DL course, because having this holistic view of other ideas is really important for thinking about ways to unlock and break through some of these barriers.
Awesome. And we have hit time, so it's time for us to wrap this up. It was great to meet all of you. Thanks for all the great questions, and thanks for all the panelists for joining us for this hour.
Also, Courtney would like to step in, I think, with a brief minute about follow-up.
Yeah, I put it in the chat so we can do it there. Please take our quick survey. As we've shared, we love your feedback. We take it into account for future instances. So please take that quick survey. And yes, I extend my thank you and gratitude to all of you for being here today and sharing all your perspectives. It's so fun to hear you all. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
See you.